It was a quiet evening when the event occurred, one that no one could have predicted. The old man walked into the crowded coffee shop, unnoticed by most, his frail figure blending in with the rest of the customers. To anyone else, he was just another face in the crowd, a forgotten soul, perhaps too tired to speak. But for some reason, his presence made the room feel different that day. In the corner, a young woman sipped her coffee, staring out the window. She noticed him, his eyes were full of something she couldn't quite place, a depth that made her feel uneasy. It was the look of someone who had seen too much, someone who understood things others didn't. She didn't know why, but something about the man stirred a feeling inside her that she couldn't explain. Without a word, he made his way to a small table by the window. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't even look at anyone, but his presence seemed to shift the atmosphere. For a moment, it felt like the entire room held its breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But then, just as quickly as the tension had appeared, it disappeared. The woman tried to ignore the strange feeling, but her curiosity gnawed at her. She glanced at the man one more time before turning her attention back to her coffee. That's when she noticed it, the necklace around his neck. It was simple, nothing too extravagant, but there was something about it that caught her eye. The pendant wasn't something she had seen before. It looked ancient, worn with age, yet somehow it shimmered in the light, as though it held secrets from another time. She didn't think much of it at first. After all, it was just a necklace. But the moment she looked away, a sense of dread filled her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had just witnessed something important, something that would change the course of her life forever. As she tried to focus on her coffee, the world around her seemed to fade into the background. Then, the unexpected happened. The old man stood up from his table and slowly walked towards the door, his eyes briefly meeting hers. In that instant, something shifted. The air felt heavier, charged with a strange energy. As he passed her, she heard a soft whisper, almost like a warning. But when she looked around, no one else seemed to notice. It was as if the moment never happened at all. The door closed behind him, and the normal hum of the coffee shop returned. But for the young woman, nothing was the same. The encounter, brief as it was, had ignited something within her, a feeling that she had just encountered a person of incredible importance. She couldn't shake the thought that this was no ordinary old man, and the necklace, that strange, mysterious pendant, she had to know more. As the evening continued, the memory of the encounter lingered in her mind. But little did she know, this was just the beginning. The hidden power of those who are often underestimated was about to reveal itself, and the old man's brief appearance in her life would set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. The question was, would she be ready for what was coming next? The following days were an unsettling blur for the young woman. Her routine seemed to be off balance, as if the simple act of going through the motions of her day was suddenly too hard to bear. The encounter with the old man weighed heavily on her mind, yet she couldn't bring herself to speak about it to anyone. What could she possibly say? That she felt drawn to someone she barely knew, a man who seemed to carry an invisible weight with him? Who would believe her? Her curiosity, however, was unrelenting. She couldn't forget the man's eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, and the strange sensation that had swept over her when she saw the pendant. It was as though the necklace had whispered secrets only she could hear, secrets about the world that no one else knew. She couldn't let it go. For the next few days, she went back to that coffee shop, hoping to find the man again. She searched the room each time she entered, scanning every face, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. But he was nowhere to be found. The coffee shop, once a place of comfort, now felt like a hollow space, empty of meaning. She couldn't help but feel that there was something larger at play, something she couldn't quite see but could sense all around her. Her search for answers led her to begin noticing people she had never paid attention to before, ordinary people, just like her, going about their daily lives. But there was something about them. A small, unnoticed gesture. A quick, knowing look. She began to realize that the world was full of invisible forces, powers hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered. And these people, these invisible forces, were all connected to the strange man she had encountered. One afternoon, as she walked through the crowded streets, a man bumped into her. She barely noticed it, just another accidental collision in the busy city. But then something odd happened. She turned to apologize, only to find that the man was staring at her, his expression unreadable. His eyes locked with hers, and for a brief moment, everything around them seemed to slow down. The noise of the city faded into the background. The world felt different. She felt as though he could see right through her, as though he knew something about her, something she didn't even know about herself. Before she could say a word, he gave her a slight nod and continued walking, disappearing into the crowd. Her heart raced. What had just happened? Who was this man, and why did his gaze leave her feeling so exposed? Her thoughts swirled as she continued down the street, the encounter gnawing at her. There was no way this was a coincidence. She could feel it, there was something more at play here. She was beginning to realize that the world wasn't as it seemed. There were hidden forces, people with unseen strengths, operating just beneath the surface. And then, there was the necklace. The more she thought about it, the more she felt it was tied to something much bigger. She had to find out who the old man was, why he was so different, and what he was trying to tell her with that necklace. It was as if he had known she would be searching for answers. It was almost like he had left behind a trail, waiting for her to follow. The question lingered in her mind as she walked back to her apartment: what power did these underestimated people truly hold? And more importantly, what was she supposed to do with the knowledge she was starting to uncover? Days turned into weeks, and the young woman's obsession with the old man and the strange world she was starting to uncover only deepened. She couldn't stop thinking about the things she had noticed, the subtle interactions, the moments that had seemed insignificant to everyone else. She began to see patterns where once there had been only noise. There were people, she realized, who had been overlooked, ignored, even dismissed as ordinary, but who possessed skills, talents, or knowledge far beyond what anyone could imagine. It was on one of these days, when the world outside her window felt like a blur of chaos, that she met him again, though not in the way she expected. She had returned to the coffee shop, unable to stay away, hoping for another glimpse of the old man. But he wasn't there. Instead, a woman at the counter caught her eye. She was middle-aged, with a tired look in her eyes, her hands shaking slightly as she prepared drinks. The young woman had never noticed her before. She had always assumed she was just another worker, blending into the background. But today, there was something different about her. As she ordered her coffee, the young woman observed the woman behind the counter more closely. There was a calmness in her movements, an air of quiet confidence that didn't match the exhaustion in her eyes. The young woman felt drawn to her, something she couldn't explain. As she took her coffee and turned to leave, she felt a sudden impulse to speak to the woman. "Excuse me," the young woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. The barista looked up, surprised, but smiled kindly. "Can I help you with something?" The young woman hesitated for a moment before speaking again. You seem different. I don't mean to sound strange, but there's something about you that feels important. Like you're not just a barista." The woman's expression shifted slightly, her smile faltering for just a second. "I guess everyone has their own story," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Some stories, though, are better left untold." The words struck the young woman deeply. There was a weight in her voice, a knowing that made her feel like she was standing on the edge of something big, something she couldn't yet grasp. The woman's eyes seemed to flicker, almost as though she were looking beyond the young woman, into something only she could see. Before the young woman could ask more questions, the barista turned away to prepare another order. But the brief exchange lingered in the air. It was as if the woman had just given her a clue, a hint that there was more to her than met the eye. But the young woman couldn't understand what it was yet. She knew, however, that this encounter was no coincidence. The woman had a secret, a talent, something hidden that others didn't see. The realization struck her with a sharp clarity: there were countless people like this woman. Ordinary people, at least on the surface, who were hiding extraordinary talents or abilities, waiting for the right moment to reveal them. The young woman had begun to understand that there were layers to the world, and only those who looked beyond the obvious could see the truth. And as she began to piece this new knowledge together, she could feel herself standing on the edge of something much larger, something that could change everything she knew about the world. But there was one more thing she needed to understand. Why was she being drawn to this hidden world? Why her? Why now? The young woman's mind buzzed with new possibilities as she left the coffee shop that day. The barista's words echoed in her ears, each one laden with mystery. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of uncovering something incredible, something that could change everything she knew about the world and the people around her. But even with all the strange occurrences, she still didn't understand the full picture. Her search for answers continued, and with each day, she became more attuned to the hidden talents around her. It wasn't just the barista. She started noticing more people who were often overlooked, ignored, or dismissed by others. A quiet man who worked in the library seemed to always know the right book to recommend, as if he could read people's minds. A homeless woman, who had been seen as nothing more than a beggar, spoke with such wisdom that it made the young woman question everything she thought she knew about the world. But none of these encounters were as dramatic as the one that occurred next. It was late in the afternoon when the young woman found herself walking down a narrow alleyway on her way home. It wasn't the safest part of the city, but she felt an inexplicable pull to this particular spot. She didn't know why, but it was as if the world was drawing her here, as though something was about to happen that she couldn't avoid. As she walked, she passed a small, seemingly unremarkable storefront, a repair shop of sorts, with a faded sign above the door. She had walked past it countless times, never once giving it a second thought. But today, something caught her eye. The door was slightly ajar, and she could see a faint light flickering inside. Curiosity getting the best of her, she stepped inside. At first, it seemed like an ordinary repair shop. The air smelled faintly of metal and oil, and the walls were lined with various tools and gadgets. But as she looked closer, she saw a figure in the back of the room, a man hunched over a workbench, his hands moving with surprising speed and precision. He didn't notice her at first, so she took a moment to observe him. He was an older man, dressed in a simple, worn-out shirt and jeans, his face lined with years of hard work. Yet there was something about him that stood out. His movements were too fluid, too controlled, as if he was working on something far beyond the ordinary. As she watched, the man looked up, sensing her presence. His eyes met hers, and for the briefest moment, she felt as though he had seen straight through her, as though he knew everything she was thinking. She froze, not knowing what to say. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling with kindness, but there was a mysterious edge to his expression. "You're looking for something," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. "Something that doesn't quite fit into the world you know." The young woman felt a chill run down her spine. How did he know? I don't know what you mean," she stammered, but the man only nodded, as if he had expected her response. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag before walking over to a shelf. There, nestled among the tools, was an object that caught her eye, something familiar. It was the same pendant the old man had worn. Her heart raced as he handed it to her. "This is yours now. You've been chosen." She didn't understand what he meant, but the moment the pendant touched her skin, everything changed. The room seemed to shift, the air thickening around her. She felt a sudden, powerful surge of energy course through her, a force she couldn't control. Her mind raced with questions, but one thing was clear: she had just crossed a line, stepped into a world that was far beyond anything she could have ever imagined. The man's voice broke through her thoughts. "The time has come. You must learn the truth." And with that, the young woman realized something crucial. The people she had underestimated, the ones who seemed invisible to the world, these were the heroes. The hidden forces she had been sensing were not just ordinary people. They were part of something greater. And she had just become a part of it. The moment the pendant touched her skin, everything shifted. It was as if the world had opened up, and she could finally see what had been hidden in plain sight all along. The shop around her faded, replaced by a flood of images, strange symbols, ancient texts, and flashes of memories she didn't recognize, yet somehow felt intimately familiar. The man stood motionless, watching her as if he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. He didn't speak, but his gaze conveyed a message that made her heart race. This was bigger than anything she could have imagined. The young woman felt her knees weaken, and she collapsed onto the nearest chair. Her mind was overwhelmed with the flood of images, too much to process all at once. But amidst the chaos, one thought stood out, like a beacon in the storm: this was no accident. The man finally broke the silence, his voice calm and steady. The pendant you now wear is more than a piece of jewelry. It is the key to understanding the truth. It was passed down through generations, kept hidden, until someone like you came along. Her breathing was shallow as she struggled to make sense of what he was saying. What truth? What do you mean? He gave her a long look, almost as if deciding how much to reveal. You've been blind, just like everyone else. The world you see, the one you think you know, has always been manipulated. The true powers of the world are not in the hands of the rich or the influential. They've been hidden in plain sight, woven into the fabric of everyday life. People who are underestimated, ignored, or dismissed, these are the ones with the real power. The word sank deep into her consciousness. She had always believed in the typical narrative: the rich and powerful were the ones who controlled everything. But now, everything she thought she knew was crumbling. How can that be possible? She asked, her voice shaky. The man leaned forward, his eyes piercing through hers. Because for centuries, the true rulers of the world have kept their power hidden. They've been watching, waiting. The pendant you now wear, it connects you to something ancient. And through it, you can see things others cannot. The young woman felt a strange pull inside her, as if the pendant were calling to something deep within her. The flood of images and feelings continued, and with each passing second, she could feel herself becoming more attuned to something beyond herself. The world around her seemed to fade, leaving only the sense of something grand unfolding. The man sighed, as if reading her thoughts. The power isn't just in the pendant. It's in you. It has always been in you, and you've been living among these hidden forces without ever knowing it. This, what you're feeling, is just the beginning. The young woman couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her mind was too full, too chaotic. But as the man's words settled in, she started to realize the depth of what he was saying. There was an entire world she had never seen, one that was hidden in plain sight. And now, she had been thrust into it, whether she was ready or not. Why me? She whispered. Why am I the one to find this? The man's gaze softened. Because you were always meant to. You've been searching for something your entire life. Now, you have the key to unlock it. Her heart raced. She had thought she was just a simple observer, someone who noticed the hidden people and the strange talents they possessed. But now, it seemed like she was part of a much larger story, one that had been waiting for her to uncover. And as the man handed her a small, ancient-looking book, he added, the path ahead will be difficult, and you'll face challenges you can't yet understand. But you are not alone. There are others like you, others who have been chosen. And together, you will uncover the truth of the world. The young woman didn't know where this path would lead, but she knew one thing: her life had changed forever. The answers she sought were no longer just a distant hope, they were within her reach. And she would stop at nothing to find them. The young woman clutched the ancient book tightly in her hands. Its cover was worn, the edges frayed with age, yet it felt strangely alive, almost as if it pulsed with energy. The man who had given it to her watched in silence, his expression unreadable. She could feel that this was a moment of no return. Whatever knowledge lay inside this book would change her forever. She hesitated for a moment before slowly opening the cover. The pages were filled with symbols and text written in a language she didn't understand. But as she ran her fingers over the ink, something incredible happened. Her mind began to translate the words on its own. She didn't know how, but she could understand them. The power of the unseen lies within those who are overlooked. Those dismissed as weak hold the greatest strength. It is not in wealth, nor in status, but in knowledge, patience, and wisdom. Her breath caught in her throat as she read further. The book spoke of a secret society, people who had existed for centuries, hidden among the ordinary, yet holding extraordinary influence. They were the ones who truly shaped the world, not through politics or money, but through their ability to remain unnoticed while steering the course of history from the shadows. She looked up at the man, her mind racing. This can't be real. It is, he replied calmly. And you are now a part of it. The weight of his words sank in. She had spent weeks questioning why she was noticing strange things, why she felt drawn to people whom others ignored. And now, she had the answer. She had been seeing the truth all along. The power wasn't in the hands of the obvious. It was hidden within the underestimated. She took a deep breath. If this is true, why haven't I heard about them before? Why do they stay hidden? The man exhaled slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. Because if the world knew their power, it would try to destroy them. His words sent a chill down her spine. She thought back to the barista, the homeless woman, the quiet librarian, people who had seemed ordinary but possessed something greater. If what this book said was true, then they weren't just unnoticed individuals. They were part of something much larger. But why me? She asked again. Why was I chosen? The man studied her for a long moment before speaking. Because you see what others don't. That's the first step. Many people go their whole lives unaware, blinded by what they're told is important. You looked beyond that. And now, you're ready to learn. She felt the weight of those words press against her. She had always been an observer, someone who noticed things that others missed. She had assumed it was just curiosity, but what if it was something more? What if she had always been meant to uncover this truth? A mix of fear and determination swirled inside her. If she accepted this knowledge, she could never go back to her old life. She would see the world differently forever. But deep down, she knew she had no choice. The truth had already begun unraveling before her eyes, and she couldn't turn away now. The man's voice broke through her thoughts. This isn't just about understanding. It's about action. There are forces that will try to stop you. If you choose this path, you must be prepared. She swallowed hard. Prepared for what? For the moment when the unseen must finally step into the light. Her pulse quickened. Something big was coming, something that would force these hidden powers into the open. And she had just stepped into the middle of it. The turning point had arrived. And there was no going back. The weight of the book in her hands felt heavier now. The words she had read still echoed in her mind, the underestimated hold the greatest power. It wasn't just an idea, it was real. The barista, the librarian, the quiet ones, the ignored ones, these people weren't just ordinary. They were part of something bigger, something hidden. And now, she was one of them. The man sat across from her, his gaze steady. Now that you know the truth, you must decide. Will you step forward, or will you walk away? She hesitated. Every part of her wanted to deny what was happening. If she accepted this path, her life would never be the same. But something inside her had already changed. The moment she had seen the pendant, the moment she had started noticing the hidden strength of people others ignored, there was no turning back. I want to understand, she finally said. I want to know what comes next. A faint smile crossed the man's face, as if he had expected this answer. Then it's time for you to see what true power looks like. He stood up and motioned for her to follow. She felt a strange pull, as though an invisible force was guiding her forward. They exited the small repair shop, stepping into the darkening streets. The city looked the same, people rushing home, neon lights flickering, the constant hum of distant conversations. And yet, she knew now that there was another world hidden within it. The man led her to an alley she had never noticed before. At the end of it stood a large, rusted metal door. He knocked twice, then stepped back. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room beyond. She stepped inside cautiously. The space was larger than she expected. It looked like an old warehouse, lined with shelves stacked with books, strange artifacts, and objects that seemed centuries old. But it was the people inside that caught her attention. They weren't what she expected. There were no men in suits, no warriors, no obvious signs of power. Instead, she saw a janitor wiping a table, a woman in a school uniform adjusting her glasses, an elderly man flipping through an old book. They looked ordinary. But when they turned to her, she felt an undeniable presence. They weren't ordinary at all. This, the man beside her said, is the real seat of power. Not in government buildings. Not in boardrooms. But here, among those who are overlooked. She swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. Who are they? They are the ones who shape the world, unseen. The janitor you see there? He once stopped a disaster, before anyone knew it was coming. The woman adjusting her glasses? She deciphered codes no computer could break. The elderly man? He has knowledge that some would kill to keep buried. Her mind struggled to keep up. These were the people who truly held power? The ones ignored by society? But why stay hidden? She asked. Because true power isn't about control, the man answered. It's about influence. And those who hunger for control would destroy us if they knew what we could do. A chill ran through her. If this secret world had remained hidden for centuries, what had changed? Why was she being brought into it now? The man's next words sent another shiver through her spine. The balance is shifting. The unseen will no longer remain in the shadows. Her breath caught. The hidden ones, those who had stayed silent for so long, were preparing for something. Something big. Something that would change everything. And she was standing right in the middle of it. The young woman's pulse pounded in her ears as she looked around the dimly lit room. Every face she saw belonged to someone who had been overlooked by the world: janitors, waiters, clerks, teachers, factory workers, people who should have been powerless. And yet, she could feel it now. They weren't powerless at all. She turned back to the man who had led her here. You said the balance is shifting. What does that mean? The man's face was grim. For centuries, we've worked in the shadows, influencing events without being seen. But something has changed. The powerful, the ones who sit in the high towers and believe they rule, have started to notice us. A murmur spread through the room. She could sense the tension in the air. The world is on the verge of something big, the man continued. The underestimated have stayed hidden for too long. And now, those in control are afraid of what happens when we step into the light. A chill ran down her spine. What happens when you do? The man exhaled slowly. Everything changes. She swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling in. Then why bring me into this? What am I supposed to do? You've already started doing it, the man said. You saw us when no one else did. That's the first step. The second is to decide where you stand. She looked around the room again. The people here weren't warriors. They weren't political figures or billionaires. And yet, they had knowledge, skills, and a quiet strength that made them more powerful than anyone could imagine. But now, they were being forced into a fight they never wanted. The door behind her creaked open, suddenly. A young man rushed inside, his breath ragged, eyes wide with urgency. They know, he gasped. They're coming. A hush fell over the room. The man beside her tensed. How much time do we have? Not enough. Panic flickered in the young woman's chest. Who's coming? The man turned to her, his expression unreadable. The ones who fear us. The ones who want to keep the world the way it is. And they will do whatever it takes to make sure we never step out of the shadows. Her mind raced. She had spent so much time wondering if these hidden people were real, questioning if she was imagining things. But now, she had her answer. And she was standing on the front line of a battle she never saw coming. The man placed a hand on her shoulder. This is the moment. You can leave now, forget all of this, go back to the world as you knew it. Or you can stand with us. She had a choice. Walk away and pretend none of this had ever happened. Or step into the light and face the truth. She looked at the people around her, the unseen, the underestimated, the ones who had stayed hidden for too long. Her heart pounded as she spoke the words that would change her life forever. I'm not going anywhere. The man nodded. Then it's time. A low hum filled the room, a shift in the air. The hidden ones were done hiding. And the world was about to witness the power of those it had ignored for too long. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with something invisible yet undeniable. The people around her, the underestimated ones, the invisible forces that had quietly shaped the world, were preparing to step into the light. The young woman had spent her entire life believing that power belonged to those who were loud, wealthy, and influential. But now, standing among these hidden figures, she understood the truth: real power isn't about being seen. It's about knowing when to act. The man who had led her here met her gaze. You've made your choice. Now you need to understand what comes next. She nodded, bracing herself. The world fears what it does not understand, he continued. For centuries, we've worked in the shadows, making small but crucial changes. We didn't need recognition. We didn't need control. We only needed to ensure that the right people had the right knowledge at the right time. She thought about all the people she had met, the barista, the librarian, the old man. None of them had craved attention. They didn't want to rule the world. They only wanted to make it better, in ways that no one else could see. But now, the man said, the ones in power have realized something dangerous. She held her breath. What? That they are not truly in control. The realization struck her like a lightning bolt. The world had been built on a lie, that money and status determined strength. But in reality, it was those who moved unseen, those who had spent their lives observing, learning, and influencing from the background, who held the real power. And now, the people at the top were terrified. She looked around the room, seeing determination in the faces of those around her. They weren't here to take over the world. They weren't here to seek revenge. They were here because it was time for the truth to be known. So, what happens now? She asked. The man gave a small smile. Now, we do what we've always done. We guide the world forward, quietly, patiently. But this time, we no longer have to do it alone. A deep understanding settled in her chest. She wasn't just here to witness history. She was here to be part of it. She had spent her whole life thinking she was an outsider, just an observer. But now she knew, seeing what others missed was not a weakness. It was a gift. She stepped forward, embracing her new role. Not as someone who would seek the spotlight. Not as someone who would chase after power. But as someone who understood the true meaning of strength, the kind that doesn't demand recognition but leaves an undeniable mark on the world. And as she looked at the people beside her, she knew one thing for certain: the world would never underestimate them again.